Now I have the full transcript. Let me write the news story. The call came at 6:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had been awake since 5, lying on the narrow couch in my studio apartment, running numbers in my head the way I always do when I can't sleep. Profit margins, liability ratios, expense patterns. My brain doesn't know how to be quiet. It just audits. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I saw my brother's name on the screen and felt that specific cold that has nothing to do with temperature. When someone calls you at 6:47 in the morning, they're either dying or they want something. With my brother, it was always the second one. "She's gone," he said when I picked up. No hello. No are you okay? Just those 2 words, like he was reporting a weather pattern. I sat up slowly. My mother had been sick for 3 years. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3 at diagnosis, then stage 4 by Christmas of that year. I had known this call was coming. I had rehearsed my reaction 100 times in the shower, during my commute, in the 10-minute gaps between client meetings. I thought I was prepared. I wasn't. "I'll drive up today," I said. "No rush," my brother said. "The estate attorney already reached out. We're meeting Thursday." No rush. My mother had been dead for less than an hour and my brother was already talking about the meeting. I hung up and sat in the dark for a long time. My name is Lena. I'm 31 years old. I'm a certified fraud examiner with 8 years of experience, and for the last 2.5 of those years, I had been spending every weekend driving 4 hours north to my mother's house in Connecticut to be the person my brother wasn't. Let me be precise about what that means. My brother Oliver is 40. He runs a real estate investment firm in Manhattan. He wears cufflinks to brunch and has opinions about wine regions. He called our mother on her birthday and at Christmas, and he had a talent for making those 2 calls feel generous, like he was offering something rare and valuable every time he picked up the phone. When Mom got her diagnosis, Oliver flew in for the initial oncologist consultation. He sat in the plastic chair beside her bed, asked 3 intelligent questions, shook the doctor's hand, and flew back to Manhattan that evening. He told me he was handling things. He sent her a food delivery subscription and an air purifier with a HEPA filter, and he called that handling it. What actually needed handling was the medication management, the twice-weekly infusion appointments, the insurance denials that required 45 minutes on hold, and a working knowledge of federal appeals processes, the physical therapy scheduling, the home health aid coordination, the nights when she couldn't keep anything down and someone had to hold the basin and stay calm. I handled it. I rearranged my caseload. I took on remote contracts only. I drove up every Friday and drove back every Sunday night. I watched my savings account drain by about $2,000 a month, between the gas, the groceries, the gap coverage her insurance wouldn't touch, the specialized nutritional supplements that weren't on the formulary but made a measurable difference in how she felt. Oliver handled the food delivery subscription. He renewed it for 2 years. He used it as a talking point at the estate meeting. The estate attorney's office was in downtown Hartford. Walnut paneling, diplomas in matching frames, the particular hush of a place where large amounts of money change hands without anyone raising their voice. Oliver was already there when I arrived. He had brought his own lawyer, a sharp-faced woman named something I immediately forgot, who arranged her legal pad on the table with the precise movements of someone who bills by the 6-minute increment. I had brought a folder. The estate attorney, a man in his late 60s with reading glasses on a chain, introduced himself as Douglas and laid out the basics. Our mother had left a will. The house, a 4-bedroom colonial in Fairfield County worth approximately $940,000 in the current market, plus a brokerage account with roughly $380,000, plus personal property. The will divided everything equally between Oliver and me. I had thought that was the arrangement. I had thought that was what we were here to confirm. "Before we proceed," Oliver said, folding his hands on the table in the way he does when he's about to explain something to someone he considers less intelligent, "I want to raise the question of contribution-based adjustment." I looked at him. Mom's care over the last 2.5 years required significant financial resources. He continued, "I covered the home health aid invoices for 14 months, the air purification systems, the premium food program. When we add up the documented expenditures," he slid a folder across the table, "my total contribution comes to approximately $67,000. Douglas examined the folder. His expression gave nothing away. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. "What are you asking for, Oliver?" "A contribution credit," he said, against your share of the estate. Since my documented contributions exceeded yours, an equitable adjustment would reflect that imbalance. I stared at the man I had grown up with, the man whose childhood bedroom had been next to mine, the man who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms when we were small. Your documented contributions, I said slowly. Correct, the food delivery service. Among other things, Oliver. I kept my voice level. The food delivery service cost $180 a month. You sent her an air purifier. You're asking for a credit against my inheritance based on an air purifier. His lawyer made a small note on her legal pad. The invoices speak for themselves, Oliver said. I thought about the 16 months I had spent working reduced hours and making up the difference from my own savings. I thought about the night in February when my mother's oxygen levels dropped and I had to make the call to the paramedics while staying calm enough to report the numbers accurately. I thought about the last 3 weeks, when she couldn't speak anymore. And I sat beside her bed reading aloud from the novels she loved because the neurologist said hearing was the last sense to go. And I wasn't going to let her leave this world in silence. None of that was on Oliver's invoice. I'd like to table this portion of the discussion, Douglas said carefully, until all parties have had a chance to review the documentation. Of course, Oliver said, with the confidence of someone who believes documentation is the only thing that counts. I excused myself and walked to the restroom at the end of the hall. I ran cold water over my wrists for 30 seconds, the way someone taught me to do years ago when I needed to think without feeling. Then I looked at myself in the mirror. He had a folder. I had a folder. The question was, whose folder told the true story? What Oliver didn't know about me is that I don't just find fraud in corporate accounts. I find it in family systems, too. I know the difference between what people claim and what the records show. I know how to reconstruct a financial history from receipts, bank statements, credit card timestamps, and calendar metadata. I had been doing exactly that for the past 6 weeks. Not because I suspected Oliver of anything specific. I had done it the way I do everything, methodically without assuming the conclusion in advance. What the record showed was this. Oliver's $67,000 claim included a $34,000 contribution to a family trust account that had been established, with both of our signatures, specifically to cover Mom's medical expenses. That wasn't a personal gift. That was a shared financial instrument. Half of the balance in that account was already mine. He was claiming $34,000 in credit for money that had been split contribution. Beyond that, the home health aid invoices he listed as his contribution, he had paid them from the trust account with shared funds, not his personal money. The actual personal spending from Oliver's accounts, the things he genuinely paid himself, came to about $8,400 over 2.5 years. My personal spending, outside the trust, came to $61,200. I had the receipts. I had the bank statements. I had the mileage logs I'd kept out of habit, an auditor's compulsion for documentation, which translated into approximately 22,000 miles of driving that at the IRS medical mileage rate represented another $13,000 in unreimbursed expense. I returned to the conference room and sat down. I'd like to share some documentation of my own, I said. Oliver's lawyer was good. I'll give her that. She pushed back on the mileage log, argued that informal caregiving wasn't a reimbursable expense under estate law, questioned whether my reduced-hour contracts during the care period could be reliably quantified. She was doing her job. But Douglas kept reading. He had that particular stillness of a man who had seen this exact situation before and was calculating, with practiced precision, how badly it could go. Mr. Oliver, he said finally, removing his reading glasses, your documented personal contributions appear to be approximately $8,400. Your sister's documented personal contributions by the same methodology appear to exceed $60,000. The claim for contribution-based adjustment does not appear to favor your position. Oliver's jaw tightened. He looked at his lawyer. She made another note. There's also the matter of the trust account withdrawals, I said. Oliver looked at me sharply. I slid another page across the table. Between February and August of this year, $47,000 was withdrawn from the Family Medical Trust in a series of transactions. Those withdrawals don't correspond to any medical invoices I can locate. They don't appear in Mom's care records. I'm wondering if you can tell me what they were for. Silence. Oliver, I said. What were the withdrawals for? He leaned back. Administrative costs. Management fees. I was managing the account. Management fees, I repeated. There's no management fee structure in the trust instrument. I helped draft it. I have the original document. His lawyer put down her pen. Oliver looked at the window. Outside, Hartford was going about its morning, indifferent to the specific collapse happening on the 14th floor of this building. I had a margin call, he said finally. His voice was different now. Quieter. In March. My firm had a leveraged position that moved against me. I needed liquidity. I intended to replace the funds before the estate settled. I looked at my brother. The man who called on birthdays and Christmas. The man who handled things. You took $47,000 from our mother's medical care fund, I said, to cover a margin call on a leveraged trade. He didn't answer. While she was dying. Douglas called a recess. He stepped out of the room and made a call I wasn't privy to. Oliver and his lawyer spoke in murmurs at the far end of the table. I sat with my hands flat on the wood and breathed. I want to tell you I felt triumphant. I want to say justice had a satisfying click, like a lock turning. But what I actually felt was a grief that had nothing to do with money. I was grieving the version of my brother I had believed in until that morning. The version who was just distracted, just busy, just not good at the emotional parts. I had told myself that story for years because the alternative was harder to hold. The alternative was that my brother had seen our mother dying and calculated what it was worth to him. Douglas returned 20 minutes later. He sat down, folded his hands, and explained the situation with the measured calm of someone delivering a clinical diagnosis. The unauthorized trust withdrawals constituted a breach of fiduciary duty. Depending on the state attorney's assessment, they could constitute elder financial abuse. He was obligated to report the discrepancy. He was recommending that the estate settlement be paused pending a forensic accounting review. Oliver's lawyer began discussing restoration and remediation. Oliver looked at me across the table. His expression was not quite shame and not quite anger. It was something in between. The face of a person recalibrating, trying to find the story in which he was still the reasonable one. You didn't have to do this here, he said quietly. You didn't have to take the money, I said. The forensic review took 11 weeks. During those 11 weeks, I stayed in my mother's house. Someone needed to maintain it, and the estate couldn't sell it during the investigation anyway. I slept in the guest room, not her room. I wasn't ready for that yet, and I spent my mornings walking the neighborhood she had walked for 30 years. There was a man I kept passing on those walks. He was in his mid-70s, I guessed, with a white beard and a rolling gait that suggested an old knee injury. He walked every morning with a cane and a small brown terrier named something I couldn't quite hear the first time he said it. He had the particular unhurriedness of someone who had nowhere to be and had made peace with that. I passed him 4 or 5 times before we spoke. He said good morning the way people used to, like it was an actual wish rather than a reflex. One morning in October, a cold front had dropped overnight and left a skim of ice on the brick sidewalks along the south end of the block. I came around the corner to find him standing at the edge of the curb, cane-braced, looking at the patch of ice between him and the coffee shop he was clearly trying to reach. The terrier sat beside him, patient and unbothered. I offered my arm without being asked. He accepted without making a production of it. We crossed the ice. He thanked me. I said it wasn't anything. You're in the Hartley house, he said, Eleanor's daughter. I told him I was. He said he was sorry. He had known my mother for 20 years. She used to leave dog biscuits on her front step in a little jar, and his terrier, Biscuit, that was the name, had been stopping there every morning for a decade. We stood on the sidewalk in the cold for a while, talking about my mother, not about the estate or the investigation or any of the machinery of death and money that had consumed my last 3 months, just about who she was. He told me she had a way of making you feel like the most interesting person in the room, even when she disagreed with everything you were saying. He said she argued with him about city planning for 2 years and he was better for it. I hadn't had a conversation like that since she died. His name was Howard. He had been a municipal court judge for 22 years before retiring. He lived 4 blocks north and had lived there longer than I had been alive. The forensic review confirmed my numbers. Oliver's personal withdrawal from the trust totaled $47,300. The report went to the Connecticut Probate Court and, separately, to the state attorney's office, which opened a preliminary inquiry into elder financial abuse. The estate attorney scheduled the reconvened settlement meeting for a Thursday in November. I drove up the night before. I wore the suit I keep for serious occasions, charcoal gray, the one that makes me feel like the work I do matters. I picked up a coffee from the place my mother liked and sat in her kitchen and read over my documentation one more time. My phone rang at 8:15. It was Oliver. "I want to discuss a resolution before tomorrow," he said. "I'm listening. I'll restore the full $47,000 to the estate, plus interest, and I'll withdraw the contribution-based adjustment claim." A pause. "In exchange for you recommending to the state attorney that no criminal referral is necessary." I thought about this for a moment. "Oliver," I said, "restoring the money doesn't address what it was used for. Mom needed a medication adjustment in March. The trust had the funds allocated. Instead, you were covering a margin call. I had to use my personal savings to cover the gap. You're asking me to make that disappear." "It was a mistake," he said. "I panicked. I was going to put it back." "She was dying," I said. "You panicked about a leveraged trade." Silence. "I can't make that recommendation," I said. "The state attorney can make its own assessment. That's not mine to give away." He hung up. I finished my coffee. I turned off the kitchen light. I walked upstairs past my mother's room, and this time I stopped in the doorway. In the dark, it still smelled like her. Like the cedar sachets she kept in the closet and the particular brand of hand lotion she'd used for 40 years. I had one more thing to do before tomorrow. Howard was in his driveway when I came around the block the next morning. He was scraping frost off his car windows with the methodical patience of a man who had been scraping frost off car windows for 60 winters. I hadn't planned what I was going to say. I told him about the meeting. I told him what Oliver had asked for on the phone. I told him I was going in alone and that I wasn't sure what alone looked like in that room, legally speaking, and whether I should have someone there who understood what was happening. He listened without interrupting. "Would it help," he said when I'd finished, "to have a retired municipal court judge in the room?" I looked at him. "I'm not representing you," he said carefully. "I'm not practicing law. I'm an old man who knew your mother and who has a reasonably clear understanding of fiduciary law and estate procedure. But sometimes a room changes when there's someone in it who knows the difference between what's legal and what's being argued." I thought about my mother, leaving dog biscuits in a jar on the front step for a decade. "Yes," I said, "it would help." Oliver's lawyer did not look pleased when Howard settled into the chair beside me. She looked at him the way people look at something unexpected, a rapid recalculation behind controlled eyes. Oliver himself barely glanced over. He had his contribution credit folder in front of him. He had the posture of someone who had decided to escalate. "Given the forensic review findings," Douglas began, "and the state attorney's preliminary inquiry, we'd like to propose a global resolution," Oliver's lawyer interrupted. "Full restoration of trust funds plus 8% interest in exchange for a written statement from Lena declining to participate in the state inquiry as a complaining witness." "I'm not a complaining witness," I said. "I'm an interested party who submitted financial documentation. Those are different things." "The documentation was submitted in your capacity as," "Excuse me," Howard said. The room stopped. He had said it quietly, just 2 words, but something in the register of his voice, decades of courtrooms, of being the person everyone in the room is watching, made everyone turn. "The proposal you're describing," he said to Oliver's lawyer, "asks Ms. Lena to use her standing as an estate heir to influence a state attorney inquiry. That's not a global resolution. That's an attempt to leverage a civil proceeding to obstruct a parallel criminal inquiry. I'd encourage you to consider whether your client wants that characterization in the record." Oliver's lawyer stared at him. "And you are?" she said. "Howard Caldwell, retired, Municipal Court, Connecticut 6th District, 22 years. He folded his hands on the table. "I'm here as a family friend. I'm not representing anyone. I'm just making sure the conversation stays accurate." Oliver looked at him for the first time. Really looked at him for the first time. Really looked. I watched something shift in my brother's face. not the recalculation of his lawyer, something older, something that looked like recognizing, finally, the weight of what he'd done in a room where the weight could no longer be argued away. "Oliver," I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected. "I'm not trying to send you to prison. I don't want that. But I need you to understand what you actually did. Not the legal category of it, what you did." He didn't look away. "She needed that money in March," I said. "And you took it. And I was driving up every week, not knowing why the account balance wasn't adding up, covering it out of my own pocket, thinking I had miscounted somewhere. You let me think I had miscounted." He closed his eyes. "I know," he said. It was the first time in this entire process that he had said something that was just true, with no strategy behind it. The meeting ended 2 hours later without a signed agreement, but with a different texture. Oliver's lawyer requested a continuance. Howard and I walked out into the November afternoon. "What happens now?" I asked. "The state attorney makes its own decision," Howard said. "You don't control that, and you shouldn't try to. What you can control is the civil portion, and from everything you've described, the civil portion resolves in your favor." We walked half a block in silence. "My mother liked you," I said. "She argued with me for 2 years about the Elm Street zoning variance," he said. "She was absolutely right. I just couldn't admit it at the time." I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed in 3 months. The civil resolution came through in January. The trust funds were restored in full, with interest. The contribution-based adjustment claim was formally withdrawn. The estate was divided as my mother had intended, equally, without correction. The state attorney's office issued Oliver a formal caution and a consent agreement requiring community service and financial literacy coursework. It wasn't prison. It wasn't nothing. It was the particular accountability of being made to learn the thing you should have known. I kept the house for 6 months while the market steadied. I repainted the front door the color my mother had always wanted and never gotten around to. I kept the jar of dog biscuits on the step. Biscuit still comes by every morning. My father had died when I was 12, and my mother had raised us alone, working 2 jobs for 6 years without complaining, without asking us to carry anything she thought she could carry herself. She had saved the house. She had saved our college funds. She had tried to leave us something. I put her photograph on the mantel where it belongs. Not a staging piece, not an asset. Just her. The debt is paid. Not the financial one. That one is settled, documented, filed. The other kind. The kind you owe to someone who held everything together so you could become the person who knew how to hold it together too. I drive back to the city on Sunday evenings now. The same route I drove for 2.5 years. But the drive is different. It used to feel like leaving the place I needed to be. Now, it feels like leaving the place I came from, which is a different thing entirely. Both of those places are mine. She made sure of it. That's the thing about people who do the quiet work. They don't leave invoices. They leave the proof in what's still standing. I've thought a lot about what I would have done differently. The honest answer is, not much. But I've also thought about why it all landed the way it did, and I think the reason isn't luck. It's something quieter than that. Oliver spent 2.5 years believing that what he documented was what was real. He had receipts, he had folder tabs, he had a lawyer who billed by the 6-minute increment, and he genuinely could not see the gap between what he claimed and what had actually happened, because he had never once sat down and looked at it from outside his own ledger. That's not stupidity. That's what happens when you let yourself off the hook for long enough that the hook disappears entirely. I used to be angry about it. I'm not anymore. What I feel now is something closer to clarity. The work I did for my mother wasn't invisible because I failed to document it. It was invisible because Oliver needed it to be. When people decide that their version of events is the true one, they stop looking at evidence to the contrary. They look past it. They look through it. He looked through 2.5 years of my life because seeing it would have required him to reckon with what he hadn't done, and that reckoning was too expensive. What I've learned, and I mean learned in the way you only learn things that cost you something, is that integrity is not just about doing the right thing when people are watching. It's about doing it when the only record is your own memory and a folder of receipts that nobody asked for. I kept those receipts because I'm an auditor, and it's reflex. But I've realized since then that I also kept them because some part of me understood, even then, that the truth has a weight problem. It sinks without documentation. It needs to be held up. Howard didn't save me in that conference room. I want to be clear about that. I had the numbers, I had the timeline, I had everything I needed to walk into that room and stand on solid ground. What Howard did was remind everyone else in the room that the ground was solid and that there are people in the world who have spent decades learning the difference between what's being argued and what's actually true. His presence didn't change my case. It changed the temperature of the room, and sometimes that's the thing that matters. My mother left dog biscuits on the front step for a dog she'd never owned. She did it for 10 years without expecting anything back. She just liked the idea of something small being taken care of. That's the kind of person she was. She didn't keep score. She didn't invoice. She just kept showing up quietly in ways that outlasted her. I think about that when I refill the jar now. The people who do the quiet work are not naive. They're not weak. They're not failing to demand what they're owed. They're building something that can't be liquidated, can't be transferred to a shell company, can't be frozen pending a federal inquiry. They're building a record that lives in how other people remember them. And when the time comes, when the room gets cold and the stakes get real, that record speaks. Oliver will have to live with what he did. That's not a punishment I assigned. It's just the arithmetic of consequence. You can restore $47,000 with interest. You can't restore the version of yourself that didn't take it. I can.